401k advisors want to build a scalable practice, but aren't always sure what to do next. Welcome to Outcomes, the podcast designed to help advisors think, make decisions, and cast a vision to create a business for the future. Here's your host, Ross Marino, financial planner, author, speaker, and CEO of Advisor2X.
Welcome to Outcomes, the podcast. Today, I am joined by Brian Graff, CEO of ARA. Welcome, Brian.
Thanks, Ross. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate it.
I have to say, I've been to the 401k Summit. Well, actually, I can't say how many times, probably more than I have fingers on my hands. But this year, I'm pretty sure I'm looking forward to it more than any other year. And based on some posts I've seen on LinkedIn, it's on, right? Does it happen in this year?
Oh, absolutely. 100% on. We're really excited. September 12th to the 14th at Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas. I was out there almost a couple of weeks ago to do some planning, frankly, catch up on a lot of planning that we would have normally been doing over the last year, which for obvious reasons we could not. But we have caught up. We're ready to go. Registration is open at napasummit.org. We've have record registration already, particularly among advisors. Obviously, there's a lot of excitement. We're going to be throwing some great events at night. We're House of Blues and Royal Machines, otherwise known as the NAPA House Band, will be playing with Mark McGrath and Dave Navarro, and a lot of others apparently. And then the second night, we're going to be at an outdoor club and throwing basically the New Year's Eve party that you didn't get to have this past year. So it's going to be great fun. Lots of fantastic content. We're going to be, talking about pretty exciting developments from a legislative and regulatory standpoint. I know some of which we're going to touch on today, ESG, fiduciary, but also some big things that Congress is considering, like a national requirement that everybody has to have a plan. So just that, little thing. So lots going on, lots to hear and learn about, but also lots of fun. And of course, the great opportunity to see all your friends in the industry again, which is something I'm sure everyone is excited to do. So again, September 12th to the 14th, Vegas, napasummit.org. Commercials over.
Now, I'm an East Coaster like you. So when I hear the New Year's Eve party that we didn't have, and I know we're going to be in Las Vegas time, that ball might drop when I normally wake up in the morning. So do I have to stay up till midnight on Vegas time?
Of course you do. Absolutely. It's Vegas. Come on, Ross.
Oh, man, I'm going to need a nap, Brian. I'm going to need a nap, but we'll be ready.
I think pretty much everyone at Summit needs a nap after Summit is over. I mean, it is a marathon or sprint, actually more better described, because it goes for about 48 hours, but it's nonstop. And listen, I'm sure there's lots of folks you want to catch up with, so you'll stay up. I'm not worried about it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Now, I know you've told the story before about when you first had an experience with a financial advisor, but if you could just maybe take 30 or 60 seconds for people who don't know, when was the first time you actually experienced the work of a financial advisor?
So my parents were public school teachers in New York, and I grew up on Long Island, and they were public school teachers. And so I have certainly shared this story with my friends in the 403B part of our industry, but we, pretty typical, an advisor came over to our house, and my dad dragged me out of my room from my Atari, probably, the big box with the two buttons that, for us older folks who remember that. And I was 11 years old and sat at the kitchen table, and, the guys really basically just talked about the value of tax deferred savings, really most of the conversation, because, my parents hadn't started saving, and they bought into it. And particularly for my mom, after my dad passed away, it really was her account, her fun account, her account to do when she was retired, buy things for the grandkids, go on some cruises, that, things that, were beyond what the pension provided, which was really for her normal living expenses. And so it really stuck with me, and maybe I was destined to do this job. I don't know because of that, but it is definitely a story that's kind of fun to tell, particularly for folks who are in this industry.
Well, I know over the last few years, we've had a lot of conversations about ESG funds. And I remember a few years ago, I kind of took the approach of it's a should do. I should know about it. It comes up once in a while. Certainly makes a lot of sense when you hear it. And if you think about the future, you would think, okay, this is probably going to be popular. So it was a should do, but it really seems like it's becoming much more prevalent in conversations. Would you say the time has now shifted? So advisors, it's now a must do on their list?
They must be apprised and aware and have some knowledge of what's going on in the ESG space, because more and more, particularly as the new Biden administration continues to talk about climate and other environmental social issues, this thing's going to be coming up over and over again. You're going to start seeing more and more of the DCIOs kind of more broad-based advertising around ESG. There's already a lot of more content in the news around ESG, particularly Wall Street Journal, other investment publications. And so, my belief in talking to plan sponsors is that they are increasingly hearing from participants about ESG, and some of the surveys that have been out there have really demonstrated how impactful, particularly for rank and file participants, ESG can be. It's something particularly younger participants are interested in talking about, and a lot of the surveys suggest that they'll save more if they were offered the opportunity to be in ESG investments. So all of that momentum isn't going away. Quite the contrary, it's going to increase. I've said in several forums that when the Trump administration decided to go down this road and do that regulation, my prediction was that it was going to ultimately have the opposite effect, because ESG and ERISA was sort of the sleepy, techie issue that ERISA lawyers like to whine about. But then they decided to put out this rule that, and create a new pecuniary standard that only an ERISA lawyer would love. And the backlash has been significant. And the backlash has been I would say bipartisan from an industry standpoint. And even, the investment houses were upset about it. The broker dealers were upset about it. Certainly consumer groups were upset about it. Certainly environmental groups were upset about it. And there's some Republicans who still are waving the flag on it and recently sent a letter to the Department of Labor on their non-enforcement action, which we can talk about in a second. But the reality is that ESG is here to stay, and it's not going to go away.
Now, you guys have a certificate program now, so there's a way for advisors to feel comfortable to learn it. And I know you have a process and document, I've heard it a million times, and I know that's the way to do it. That's certainly part of the certificate program. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. What we're trying to do is the ESGK program, which is actually going to be launched in May, is essentially trying to take the veil off of this cloud, a mystery around ESG. That really it's just another type of investment option. And from a regulatory standpoint, that's where we're going. I mean, Trump administration had put this sort of cast a pall upon ESG and tried to spook people in the preamble, talked about how, they have concerns about ESG investments. All of that's going away with the new administration. And they also created this sort of pecuniary rule, which basically said as long as an ESG investment had pecuniary factors and had some type of financial factors associated with it, that it's not primarily for social purposes. But it's a testament to regulatory vagary, and any rule that requires you to hire an ERISA lawyer to make an investment decision is never going to work. No plan sponsor is going to want to make investment decisions by hiring an ERISA lawyer. And they don't want to hire a ERISA lawyer to begin with, but the idea of hiring one to make investment decisions is nonsensical. So that thing's gone away. The Department of Labor has already said we're not enforcing it. They're made it clear that they're going to rewrite the rule. We've sent correspondence to them about how important it is to do that as expeditiously as possible. But I think where we're going is a place where ESG is just like, frankly, it's just a type of investment option. And really, that's, if you think about it, that's what it is. I mean, a lot of ESG portfolios that focus on climate per se, if you look at the underlying portfolio, it's a lot of tech stocks. And so, you could have a situation where you have a tech fund that is a bunch of tech stocks, and you have a E fund that's a bunch of tech stocks. And because it's an E fund, labeled an E fund, somehow it's under the prior rule. Well, I guess the rule is still in effect until they rewrite it, but it's not being enforced. So the rule that has no teeth, there was a negative view on that just because of the label, even though the underlying investments were the same. So what this course is about is sort of, let's get through all that nonsense. Let's just talk about what this really is. Let's develop a process. And a lot of that process, frankly, is understanding that, you've got to, from a due diligence standpoint, look at the underlying investments. If you've got a large cap fund, regardless of how it's constructed from a portfolio standpoint, it's a large cap fund, right? So, right now, as a lot of advisors know, there isn't really benchmarking in the ESG area. And that's definitely an issue that needs to get addressed. And I expect the larger benchmarking institutions will be doing that hopefully relatively soon. But in the meantime, what we talk about is a process where you look at the construction of the portfolio. If it's large cap, you can benchmark it to other large cap funds. Right? It's large cap to large cap, apples to apples. If it's performing well on a relative scale, then that's a process. ESG funds tend to fall into the similar buckets that other types of investment funds tend to. They're either large cap, mid, emerging markets, et cetera. And so that's essentially what we're trying to explain to them what this is, what it isn't, and a process for employing them into funds, because there's going to be more being prepared to employ them into funds because there's going to be more and more of a demand of it. I think that's where we're going. There's going to be certainly political forces that are going to try to push farther and actually go almost, as I said, the 180 from the Trump administration, this negative point of view on ESG to a overly positive point of view, with some folks pushing for like a requirement that ESG be considered as part of any type of 401k menu. Like you have to have at least, quote, one or more ESG funds. We would not support that. That goes too far. We just think ESG there should be a level playing field. If the plan sponsors, participants are looking from them from a market standpoint, we should let the marketplace work appropriately, and that's the way it should happen. And basically all signs would suggest that more and more plans over time are going to be considering these types of options.
I like the idea of benchmarking the actual holdings, because it doesn't sound like it's attached to any ESG objective, because how would I do that? I have no idea what that would even mean.
Well, but that's the point.
Right?
The most, from a fiduciary standpoint, the most important thing is what is this thing? What it's constructed with, and what are the financial implications of that? Right. And so we're all talking about buckets of investments here. Everything's buckets of investments. Whatever the buckets of investments are, that's what you're really should be looking at. Whether you label it this or that, or it's integrated, all of that really is, that's part of the investment policy. But ultimately what you're looking at is the performance of the underlying investments.
And that makes sense. Now, you mentioned that you had the Trump administration and now we have Biden, and there's going to be some changes. Well, when I hear of
just a
something
little.
new, yeah, just a little, right? So not only is this new, there's also going to be some changes. And as it relates to ERISA, that kind of scares me a little bit. Should I be a little afraid of that, or how should I approach it?
Well, you're talking about generally speaking. I
Yeah.
think, well, no, I don't, I'm not terribly worried about significant changes on the ERISA side. Let's kind of segue to the fiduciary, because that's, I think, the thing that the boogie monster that I think most people think about when it comes to ERISA and Democratic administrations, because going back to the Obama fiduciary rule, first of all, a signal was already sent when this administration, and frankly, you could probably count on two hands the number of times this administration has agreed to something the Trump administration did. It is not a very common thing to do. But one of the things that they agreed to was the Trump proposal on the prohibited transaction exemption for fiduciary advice. They let that go. They let that become final. They agreed that this was a good rule. They said that this could be better, but it's not worth throwing out. And for this administration, that's a huge concession. And so what it is a signal saying, you know what, this is kind of for everyone in the industry, this is the construct. We're going to use these impartial conduct standards. They were, frankly, if you look at Reg BI, a lot of that construct was based on the Obama fiduciary rule. The thing that people objected to so strongly about the Obama fiduciary rule, and I apologize, I have no idea what's going on with the video here. I've got all sorts of strange colors. One of the things that the Obama administration, did that the people objected most strongly about was the enforcement part of it, was the rules around class action lawsuits, the private action. That's not something that's embedded in the Obama administration rule. Sorry, in the Trump administration rule. It's really the standards in terms of the process standards, like on a rollover. You have to document that it's in the best interest of the participant to roll the money out of the plan. Those kinds of things the Obama administration kept, and the Biden administration has bought into. So I don't really think on fiduciary, what you're going to see is a major rehaul of the standards. Rather, what I would say is they're going to tweak around the edges, but they could be significant for some people. But I think one of the big things that NAPA was able to accomplish in that regard was setting out a very clear set of rules that would allow for a fiduciary advisor plan advisor to continue to work with a participant. Before this rule was finalized, it was ambiguous. And now what's interesting is that you have very, very clear set of process and rules that would allow for a 401k fiduciary advisor to work with a participant on a rollover transaction. Before, it was unclear whether that advisor could continue that relationship because of the conflict. Now, it's absolutely okay.
Now, you probably know of some changes that are likely as far as the tax code goes, or some that maybe they're likely, maybe not, but they still have to be on our radar. So how about you talk a little bit about what's coming up in 2021?
Sure. So, and a lot of this is going to be very much in flux, but the Biden administration is going to come out with a pretty massive tax proposal, increasing corporate tax rates, some things on the capital gain side. I think it's important for people to remember from a process standpoint that unlike the previous bill that was pretty much whatever, the COVID relief bill that passed recently, and that was really the Biden administration proposal. When it comes to tax changes, Congress feels a lot more ownership, particularly the tax running committees, the Ways and Means and Finance. They don't just, do whatever the president says. I don't care who's in parties in charge. I used to work for that committee. These guys do not just accept whatever the administration is at the time. It's very much a this is our process. We do it. We do what we think is right. And the members of the committee feel a lot of vested interest in being involved in the construction of the proposal. So whatever comes out of the Biden administration, I do not assume it's going to be exactly the same. Now, general principles: increasing corporate rates, increasing rates on capital gains, carried interest, those kinds of things are definitely on the table. Estate taxes, reducing the lifetime limit, from what it is now under the Trump Tax Cut and Jobs Act down to probably before then, closer to 5 million. Those are the kinds of things that are 100% in play. And obviously from a retirement plan standpoint, we've already seen, we had this sort of attack on the limits with the COLA freeze that was proposed as part of the COVID bill. And then we were successful in getting it removed. But obviously we have to be diligent about further attacks on the retirement plan system. They're definitely going to be in the mix. Roth, some type of Rothification, maybe Rothification for people making over $400,000. Remember, the president's pledge to not increase taxes for people making more than $400,000. And then the financial transactions tax is also something that could be in the mix because it raises so much money. 10 basis points raises $750 billion over 10 years.
Boy, that's a big number, and that's got to be attractive.
It's a big number.
So what about changes coming up that could be a big deal, but it just doesn't seem like they're being talked about a lot?
I think the biggest thing that a lot of our industry isn't paying enough attention to, in my opinion, is a proposal that is one of the priorities for the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee and is increasingly a priority for the chairman of the Finance Committee, such Richie Neal of Ways and Means and Ron Wyden of Oregon on the Senate Finance Committee, are two proposals that are kind of being melded together. And we've been spending a lot of time with staff, congressional staff, working on these. The first is called the Automatic Retirement Plan Act, but basically, for those of you who live in California or Oregon and Illinois, New Jersey now, Virginia's in the process of enacting this. These are state requirements that require employers with 10 employees, I think Illinois is 25 employees, to have some type of payroll savings arrangement. Could be a 401k, but also could be a payroll deduction IRA. And then the default is a state-run program. Like in California, they have something called the Secure Choice Program. Oregon has a similar sort of state-run payroll deduction IRA product for private sector employers. And I know it kind of makes people scratch their head. States going into the financial services makes me scratch my head. But that's that's part of this deal. I kind of look at these proposals as there's two components. One is the mandate to have a plan, and then the fact that the state creates this product to satisfy the mandate. I would certainly prefer the mandate without the product personally, but that's the way the world works. In any event, what this Ways and Means proposal would do is nationalize that. It would create a national requirement instead of the state by state approach, which is getting kind of unseemly from a coordination standpoint. And it would require all employers across the country to have a retirement plan of some kind. Now, it's not going to require employer contributions. It's not going to mandate that you have to use the federal government product. They may reinstate the MyRA as a default. And by the way, there's also going to be, the tax credit for new plans. They're going to, instead of making it 50% up to $5,000, it's going to be 100% up to $5,000. It's basically a cost. They're trying to say it's a cost-free requirement to the employer. So the real question is from a macroeconomic perspective, I've seen the numbers. There's like 30 million people making under $100,000 who have access to a plan. I think if you include some of the potential, anyway, you're talking about 30, 40 million new, just this proposal, 30, 40 million new entrants into the system. and the numbers really add up. And so let me keep it going, and then I'm going to ask the question. So the second part of this proposal is Chairman Wyden's proposal, which would take the savers credit, which is really underutilized and not, frankly, been successful at encouraging savings, and transform it, just, throw it out and start over and create a government matching program for moderate income workers. What do I mean by this? Basically, based on your tax return income levels, families making up to $85,000 could get a 50% match up to $2,000 in savings. And that's per spouse. So you're talking about a maximum $1,000 government match for each spouse in a family. And that's a significant amount of money. We kind of think of that as, small potatoes. I think a lot of wealth advisors would. But if you're looking at it from a macro standpoint now, and by the way, that part of the proposal, the first part's, new coverage. What I'm talking about now applies to everybody, even if they're in an existing plan, even if the plan provides a match already. This is an extra match. And by the way, this match goes into the 401k or IRA of the saver. It's deposited by the Treasury into the account. Now, some of the record keepers listening go, oh my God, how's this going to work? Well, we're going to have to figure that out. But you're going to want to figure it out, because guess what? The stuff's going to add up. 1,000 here, 1,000 there. You start talking about some real money. And I've seen the math on this, and I'm not going to tell you exactly what the numbers are, but we're talking trillions of dollars of news between the two proposals, because now we're assuming there's going to be a lot more gig workers who are going to take advantage of this. You've got a lot of savers who, like public school teachers. In 403B, you don't get a match. Now you're going to get a match. So your take-up rates are going to be much higher. And, the numbers we're working with EBRI on are trillions of dollars of new savings. So really the question that your audience needs to be asking themselves is, I'm a plan advisor, I'm a specialist, and our whole industry, I love my NAPA community, that, but we spend ridiculous amounts of time and money fighting over 50,000 plans. That's it. That's all we do. We all are fighting over the same 50,000 plans. There's 600,000 plans. We ignore 550,000 of them, and we fight over the 50,000 that have more than $30 million. That's all we do, right? And somehow there's all these small plans out there, and there's got to be a way to make that part of what you do. And that's the question that this is going to force the audience to think about. Because if I'm talking about the combined proposal adds roughly 50-ish million people into the system. 50 million.
Wow.
A lot of people. Okay? 50 million new entrants to the system, trillions of dollars. I'm not talking about trillions of dollars that we would normally get. I'm talking about trillions of extra dollars that we would normally get over the next 10 years between the new savings and the government match. So you want to be part of this? And I think PEPs perfectly are positioned to be part of this equation, because one of the things that this legislation is going to do, something we were very instrumental in pushing for, is it doesn't just leave it to payroll deduction IRAs. There's going to be a new 401k safe harbor. And this new 401k safe harbor says if you have as long as you stick, it's a deferral only plan, stick to the IRA limit or maybe a little bit higher than the IRA limit, no testing. Simple, super simple. And so you can go out and sell a 401k platform product, no testing, through a PEP, combined 5500 form, easy peasy to small businesses. It's a payroll slot. we talked about 403B before. People in that industry, what they do, and we kind of, a lot of times plan advisors kind of look askance at 403B advisors, like, what are these guys doing? They're knocking on teachers' doors and coming to my parents' house and selling them little Well, what they were doing was they were selling a relationship. It's not just the 403B. It was a holistic financial services relationship with my family. Well, now I sell a 401k PEP to a small business that has to have one. And all of those participants become potential clients of my practice. You need to be thinking participant business, not plan business. And that's what this, when you're talking about 50 million new customers to the financial services industry, someone's going to want to look at that as an opportunity.
Since I started in the 401k part of this business close to 20 years ago, I've been frustrated with what it takes for small employers to install a 401k plan and what it takes on the back end for that. So every year, I think I start a little more hopeful that it's going to happen. They're going to come up with a way. And now technology has certainly increased. The PEPs are out there. I hope we're getting to that point, because if it becomes a mandate on the federal level, if the technology is there,
you're certainly addressing the distribution challenges. I mean, I've often said small plans are sold or not bought, right? And you're dealing, you're addressing that sold part by making it a requirement for those employers. But it has to also be a mindset that's different, Ross. We look at the P&L for the plan, and we see these startup plans, like how make money on these plans, and we have that very narrow view, and you have to think more holistically about the fact that these are participants, these are potential prospects, all of those families that are in that plan for broader financial services. And if you think that way, and you look at the modeling, and I've talked to some companies, some financial services firms that are getting this and see this opportunity, it changes your whole mindset on the small plan business. And that's what I want to encourage folks to do, is to sort of recognize that what you're gathering is a bunch of families that are potential financial services prospects. The plan is merely, or I've described this is my 401k equals milk speech, which is, in the old days, when I was growing up, the stores would offer milk at basically no cost, or during Thanksgiving, the turkeys were basically free. So you come into the store to buy other stuff. Well, now the 401k is your milk. So you're going to pretty much, if you break even with the 401k, great, because all of these families are now your prospects for financial services.
Sounds like a trend. So now let's go into what we wish the world was like. It's the final question. It's the magic wand question, Brian. We always finish the podcast with the magic wand. So if you had this magic wand and you could wave it, change anything in the world, what would you change?
And this is kind of my holy grail from a personal standpoint. I've been doing retirement policy coming on 30 years now. This will be come this October, it'll be my 25th anniversary as the CEO of this organization. And the thing that I'm most proud of from a mission standpoint is what we've done to improve the system, whether it's finally reversing this trend that was happening for those of you around, a long time, like in the 80s and 90s, where they basically just chopped away at the retirement system to pay for other stuff. And we put a stop to that in the mid 90s, and then, reversed all the bad stuff in EGTRA. This is actually the next month in May is the 20th anniversary of EGTRA. I'm apparently the only one who cares about this, but that's because I worked so hard to get those changes made when I was newly installed as the head of this organization. And so improving the system is one thing, but the one thing that we haven't been able to do is that coverage line. If you look at, when I make presentations, maybe been to the summit, you've seen that bar graph, and I'm sure I'll show it again this September. It's just a flat line since ERISA. We've basically been hovering around 55% coverage since ERISA. And that means systemically, there's a lot of folks who are underserved by this system. And, my magic wand is to finally move that needle and make it so that the vast majority of workers in this country have some opportunity to save. Because what we know is that when they do have a plan at work, they are 15 times more likely to save for retirement. Even moderate income workers are 15 times more likely to save when they have a plan at work. It works in the workplace. 401ks are great. There's a lot of criticism in the media about the 401k. My response is, don't blame the drought on the well. The system works. The product works. The problem is not enough people have it. And so the magic wand is to make sure the vast majority of Americans finally have a way to comfortably save for retirement.
Well, I hope this year we're able to break through. Brian Graff, thank you so much for being on the show, and I look forward to seeing you in Las Vegas.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ross. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Outcomes. Subscribe now to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Advisor 2X. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service providers with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.